name is Wojciech Przybylski. I'm editor-in-chief of Visegrad Insight. Visegrad Insight is a media and analytical platform on Central Europe, from Central Europe. And today's discussion is part of a series, Visegrad Insight Breakfast. Also part of a series we have prepared. This episode, this meeting today is in partnership with the European Liberal Forum, one of 5 already we have been running together. The European Liberal Forum being the political party, political family group, think tank in the European Parliament, is bringing with us topics of European importance, and we're merging perspectives that sometimes seem to be detached. And today's discussion, we're very happy to have fantastic speakers and a great moderator, Tomek Kasprowicz, with us. So I will not speak longer, but just pass floor to Tomek. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Wojtek. Hello, everyone. So today we are going back to the topic of the future of the work, and we have our wonderful speakers today. And today we'll be talking with Joanna, Professor of Economics at University of Warsaw and the leader of GRAPE group. Albin Sybera, journalist and a consultant and a former staffer of the State Environmental Fund for Czech Republic, and Georg Eder, the digital transformation expert and a person that tried to put together all of the information about the automation and the labor market, which is not easy for multitude of reasons. And for our first part, I would like to start with the discussion about how this whole process is progressing. The automation and the change of the workforce is a topic for years now, and we hear how much our jobs will be transformed. However, we don't see it so much on the everyday basis. So the question is, are those projections too far going, too optimistic or pessimistic, some may say, or we are just waiting for some impulse to change? Could the pandemics be such an impulse to change the way we work? And I would like to hear a comment from Joanna about that.
I hope Joanna is with us. She had some connection problem.
So we'll get back to that later, as soon as she's back. Well, then I'll pass this problem to Albin then.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Well, I have been pretty much thinking about these paradoxes of digitalization. The fact that on one hand, we see all these digital and technological advancements. We are witnesses of this unprecedented progress in the history of human civilization. And at the same time, however, we see that in large communities, and especially I think this is very true of Central European countries, are still living so-called the classical life of industrialization. And I have actually decided to prepare a few data on the example of the Czech Republic, where I think this is a long-term issue that's not just something these gaps that have been widening is not only a question of these past years, but it's a long-term thing that we can witness over more than a decade. So if I do this procedure correctly and I share the screen one more time, if you give me just a second, I think it should be shared right now. Is that correct? Okay, good to see your heads nodding. And well, just one of the few things that I wanted to focus on. If you give me just one quick second to make room on my own screen so I see what I'm talking about. This dissatisfaction, I wanted to point out one quick survey that the newspaper that I, for example, write for that conducted 10 years ago And while the newspaper is more of a intellectual and its readership is rather highly educated, even in that survey we could see results pointing out that the media are rather overlooking the people of plain and ordinary origins. And I think in the survey it was also published later on on publications 20 years after the breakdown of communism in Central and Eastern European countries. And those of you who are interested, you can look it up, or you can contact me and I can send you a link or details for the publication. What I found really interesting is that if we now move on to a more recent period, to the year 2018, we have a survey that I wrote about for the Visegrad Insight, which was called Czechia's Black Conscience. And there, on the example of people affected by the extortion proceedings in the Czech Republic, which is a rather specific form of legal arrangement, extorting property from the people, from the indebted people in the Czech Republic. That these people are some part of the population that's been pushed to the margins the most. And these people are, while they have the benefits, the ups of the digitalization, meaning they have the access to the internet, they really have the information overflow. At the same time, socially, they're really pushed down low. And what the chief sociologist in charge of this survey, one of the chief warnings he was pointing out to, and I think this is really, is that these people are really prone to being manipulated by quick and easy populist messages. And he was using the example of Brexit, and a population which might be prone to similar type of manipulation. Later on in 2019, there was a much more of a bigger survey, and perhaps the most concise survey of the Czech society to date. It was called Divided by Freedom. It was commenced by the Czech public broadcaster. And what I found interesting, what I quickly, just a few thoughts about the survey I wanted to share with you, is that this survey pointed out several divisions that sort of cut the Czech society on several levels. You cannot simply talk about the divided society, left, right, in a conventional sense of the word, pro-EU or versus more Eastern totalitarian-leaning tendencies, but you really see divisions through the societies. Like some of the most notable ones in case of the Czech society is how the very thin top layer of the society it concerns only a very small percentage of the population. And another one notable is the difference between male and female salaries. And of course, the final worth mentioning, which probably you have noticed in the media all over the world, are the political divisions themselves, where you see huge demonstrations on one hand, but at the same time soaring popularity of the Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, the populist Prime Minister, if I may say that way. One last thing I was thinking quickly to point out is that I'll give you an example of the Moravian Silesian region, which is on the north eastern part of the Czech Republic, actually on the border with Poland, where the cases of COVID-19 have spiked recently. And what is quite interesting is that this happened in state-owned coal mines. And it happened already in June, where we could witness the cases spiking, and the state didn't take any action, which is quite contrasting to what was going on in March and April, where the Czech Republic imposed some of the strictest restrictions relating to the spread of COVID-19. But what's actually happened only in a local region in Karviná, and on top of it, it happened in the state-owned mines, where state could have acted very swiftly. This sort of region was sort of left unnoticed. And to myself, I'm posing the question whether this can backfire into the populist government of the Czech Republic. So these are quick few thoughts about the Czech society I wanted to share with you, and I'll leave more room for the comment, if I may, at this time.
Okay, thank you. So this was the awaited PowerPoint presentation, Georg. I hope you're satisfied. But basing on this, you have mentioned that there is a problem which we also face when we are, for example, preparing our report about the future of work, about the lack or scarcity of reliable data.
Yes.
That might be a part of the feeling we had that, okay, there is a lot of discussion about it, everybody talks about it, but does it really happen? Do we feel it happening? The answer was to a large degree, no, for last 5 years. I personally work in a business that is all about creating automation and changing how people work, but this is still such a small scale. So the question is it really happening? Or is it only supposed to happen, and whether it will or not, we don't know yet. And why is it so that we don't really have that much of a data about it, and what we can expect in the future from this perspective? Are those at least state agencies concerned with statistics, are they going to be interested in that finally and get some reliable data?
Let me start. First of all, thank you very much for having me on. It's a great pleasure to be with you. And let me start off with a quote by Solow, the founder of the Solow model and a purveyor of modern economics. And he said, computers are everywhere, but in the productivity statistics. And that's one of the big problems that we're facing when it comes to actually measuring the impact that automation has. On the one hand, and this is something that we've seen throughout the COVID-19 debate, I'll leeway into that in a second. But first, the fact that this has over time become a process that has accompanied us for the past decades has been something that makes it comparatively difficult, because you don't have a concrete cutoff date. You can have because of the fact that, for example, you have improving rates of whether it is up and download speed or processing power. Those are things that change relatively quickly and exponentially, obviously, with the adoption of X technology. And so the revolution isn't being televised. The second point that I want to make, and this is where I'm going to leeway into the debate and also into what Albin has promulgated. On the one hand, the inequality that we've seen rising over the past couple of months throughout the entire developed world, actually. I mean, when we're seeing that, for example, Jeff Bezos makes $13 billion additionally, while large numbers of the US population have gone into unemployment, it really makes you consider the symmetry of this crisis. The second, when it comes to symmetry, is the political division that he also points out. Now, this is something that we've seen in the 2008 financial crisis as well. As a general standard of living drops, we're seeing political divisions rise, leading more people to the right, which also means that we're seeing a resurgence of illiberalism. And I think this is something that very closely reflects what Albin talked about. Now, what my report from 2.5 years ago, I think already underlined, is that this issue of technological transformation is one that plays into both fields. On the one hand, it is about accompanying a social change, but on the other hand, it is about knowing that this isn't something that is only going to be a unilateral change, that this is going to have to impact large segments of society. How exactly that works is an astonishingly difficult process to follow, because obviously technology doesn't impact work unilaterally. On the one hand, it can, for example, mean that it creates jobs, for example, through Uber, but on the other hand, it can easily also mean that it reduces jobs. Look at people that write dictionaries, for example. And this is something that has accompanied my publication with the European Liberal Forum. What I did was I took a stock of where the current debates were at the time. And that was very specifically in the jobs versus task debate. How do you define a job? And I did so by defining it through two variables. On the one hand, it is defined through a sum of tasks in a specific period of time. What that means is, for example, the definition of a mechanic has changed drastically, or even better yet, the definition of what an accountant does every day has changed drastically over the past 20 years. And that is not only limited to high-skilled jobs, but throughout the job spectrum. For example, a mechanic became a mechatronic. The digital became something into more analog. The people that have worked with their hands are also going to be people that are working with computers. Like I said, the computers everywhere, but the productivity statistics. So I specifically had a look at industries that were not the usual suspects for automation. I had a look at the service sector. I had a look at, for example, journalism, where more and more automated writing is being done. I had a look at, for example, the medical industry, and specifically doctors, treatments, radiology specifically, where, for example, 2 days ago, a new study came out, co-written by the University of Vienna, that shows how AI is actually improving the training of pupils and of doctors, because of the fact that they are have the possibility to test certain radiological results based upon precedents. The study even went further and said, you know, we can improve not only the quality of the work that doctors do, but also improve the education the doctors go through. And this is something that has until now in the literature been a little bit has been relatively marginalized, the educational aspect of automation, for example. Now, the last aspect that I wanted to show, and this is where we're going back into the symmetry argument internationally, has been how have different countries reacted to a relatively homogeneous shock, a relatively homogeneous transition. The technology that we're seeing has been relatively constant. What I mean by that is it's the same companies that are pushing this. It is Google, Amazon, Facebook, Alibaba, for example, GAFAs into the European realm, the same way that the shock of COVID-19 has been relatively homogeneous. Most countries have been hit similarly, if not equally, in spite of because of the fact that this has been a health crisis that has not only had asymmetrical shocks on different countries, but has had a relatively symmetrical shock. So what I found very fascinating is the heterogeneity of different countries reacting to this in their policies, for example, short-term work, to the homogeneity of the shock, in spite of the fact that there's an asymmetry, of course, with the industries that have been hit hardest. Now, this is where I think our discussion is going to take place, and I'm already really looking forward to seeing where we're able to dock in. And I'm already looking forward to hearing the other speakers and their opening remarks.
Thank you very much. I see Joanna is back, so I hope this time we'll be able to hear her. And I'm heading towards one more question, because, well, we more or less know what we are heading into and what's probably going to happen. But the question is, what are the scenarios of the societies and economies adapting to it? In our report about the future of work, we are trying to find the 4 of them, which is, of course, far from exclusive all possible futures that may happen. And I would like to hear your take on what is your idea of how our economies, especially regionally, will be changing, adapting to both the demographic changes and the automation that's coming.
Hi, I'm sorry for disappearing. I just made an ad hoc decision to leave my country where Wi-Fi works, and I moved to a country where Wi-Fi is not endemic technology, so they are not really useful. They're using it a lot. I really apologize for this technological mistake, which I think is a problem, which I think is quite useful as an entry to the discussion that we're having now. Because the term technology itself, or automation, or robotization, or how technology changes our jobs, or the future of jobs, it's all ours, that is economists' fault. We're just using the wrong words. And then non-economists misunderstand us, and then everybody's confused. So let me try by first introducing several, how do I say that, introducing the concepts for which we gave the wrong names, and then it's easier to talk about stuff. So technology itself, the way we talk about it, has dramatically changed the nature of work by changing the task content of jobs. You can say that it's changing the nature of jobs, but in fact, it's the role that it has is going to be highly heterogeneous across countries, mainly due to the fact that jobs or wages are different across countries. So let me try to explain what I mean by that. When we say task content of jobs, then you have to think about an occupation, a given type of a job, as we usually say in a colloquial language, but let's just try to be more specific and say occupation, as a stream of tasks that you have to do between Monday 8 a.m. and Friday 5 p.m. So over the course of your work, you're doing all kinds of activities, and these activities all together, we can call them, we can name them as tasks, and we can try to position them on three important dimensions. The first dimension is interpersonality. So to what extent the tasks that you do involve interacting with other humans. It's really important to understand that not all occupations, even if we interact physically doing that with other humans, require interaction with other humans if those other humans are going to be replaced by machines. So first is interpersonality. The second dimension that we have to think about is cognitive requirements. So how skilled do you have to be able to perform these tasks? And this level of skill requirement, it's very often confused or it's mistaken for education, but it's not purely education. So you can think about it as a bundle of education and experience in doing some specific tasks. For example, dexterity that is required in some occupations that require manual work is an element of both education and human capital that's embedded in a given person that cannot be transferred to another person. And then the third dimension we think about is routineness of a given occupation. And that's again a very confusing word, because we don't mean routineness as in mundane and boring, and humans don't like doing that, but routine as codifiable. So something that can be easily translated into a syntax, a code, a procedure, and therefore a human can be replaced by a machine. So if a given task is not easily codifiable, that means it's going to stick to humans for a long time. If a given task is easily codifiable, then it's not going to stick to humans, and it's easy to replace a human with a machine. So let me give you a couple of examples to convey how this huge wave of technological change that has indeed taken place since 1970s affected or how we can think about occupations against those three dimensions that I just mentioned. Think about somebody who's laying tiles. We typically used to think about that job, that occupation, as a low skill manual work, right? Doesn't require college, doesn't require high school. It's a physical type of work and so on. But it's the type of work that requires huge amount of experience and dexterity. So it's something that is not very easily conveyed to a machine. At the same time, for a human, it's a mundane thing because you do tile by tile by tile, and you move to a new place and you put tiles again, and it looks the same way. But for a machine, understanding the new space, measuring it, adjusting the tiles, and putting them, adjusting to the space in which, the surface in which you have to put them, and so on, it's a complicated task. So we used to think about a person who lays the tiles as somebody with low level of skills. But if you think about my three dimensions, interpersonality, cognitive abilities or cognitive requirements, and routineness, this job is not codifiable. It doesn't require much, still requires a lot of experience, so high embodied human capital, and interpersonality is not very strongly involved. Think about accountants, the example that was just given a second ago. An accountant used to be a person who essentially needed to retype stuff from one piece of paper to another piece of paper in a given order. Now, that's an extremely codifiable task. It requires a lot of human capital because you need, like education, because you need to know the rules of accounting. And that's something that people studied at school for very many years. So it's a high skill type of occupation, but it's an occupation on which a high portion of tasks that are being performed are easily codifiable and therefore can be easily changed, or a human can be easily replaced by a machine. Now, I know I'm giving a boring lecture in early morning, but if you think about technology in those three terms, so to what extent we're changing interpersonality, to what extent we're changing the requirement of cognitive skills, and to what extent we're replacing the tasks that we talk about are routine or codifiable, as opposed to non-routine, that is non-codifiable, then we kind of understand how technology is going to heterogeneously affect economies. Think about Central and Eastern Europe, where labor was relatively cheap. When the whole wave of automation came to Western European, generally advanced industrialized economies, firms in those countries did two things. One, they replaced a lot of their own workers with machines. That's the automation wave that we've seen in the data. The second thing they did is that often enough, they've seen that some tasks are not very easily codifiable, but they can be easily done without direct interpersonal interaction. And those jobs have been sent to be performed in Central and Eastern Europe. These are pretty mundane jobs, but they are not routine in the technological understanding of this term. And the huge growth in the business process outsourcing sector in Central and Eastern Europe, the huge growth in large part of the dexterity requiring manufacturing that is being done in Central and Eastern Europe, all this is the benefit that Central and Eastern Europe has reaped simply because wages were low enough that it was not profitable enough to try to teach the computer to do those jobs. Now, if you think about long-term trends, then obviously computers are going to become cheaper and cheaper, machines, robots, however you want to call it, and workers are not going to become cheaper and cheaper, which means that the whole wave of automation, robotization, technological change that United States, Japan, Western Europe have experienced over the course of 80s and 90s is going to eventually come to Central and Eastern Europe and is going to have exact same type of effect. But until it does, we're actually benefiting from the fact that some tasks are not easily codifiable, technology allows them not to require that much interpersonal interaction, but at the same time, they may require some level of cognitive abilities, which raises also demand for human capital in Central and Eastern Europe. And this is something that has been happening over the past 2 decades and is something that is still likely to continue over the next perhaps decade, perhaps 2, depends on technological innovations in the types of performing given tasks. And it's something that's actually helping immensely Central and Eastern Europe to catch up with the wave of jobs for highly skilled human capital. We have a lot of highly skilled human capital, but not many jobs for them existed in the region. And those jobs are there. They're pretty well paid. They're international corporations. Perhaps people don't find them terribly exciting, but at least they are there, right? So the real threat is what's going to happen. So how are we going to keep creating jobs for high-skilled human capital when this high-skilled human capital becomes relatively more expensive than the machines? And again, machines are becoming cheaper and cheaper every day. Automation, codifying, stuff like this is becoming cheaper and cheaper every day, whereas human capital in Central and Eastern Europe is not. And when this break point or tipping point is reached, then we're going to see the same kind of waves as in Western Europe, with the main exception that in Western Europe it was for low-skilled manual workers or medium-skilled manual workers in the middle of the wage distribution, whereas in the case of our countries, this will be high-skilled service sector workers in the middle of wage distribution. I know I've been talking terribly long, so I should just shut up right now and let everybody else take the ground. Thanks so much for having me here, and I'm looking forward to hearing your further comments.
Well, thank you very much. Not boring, so don't worry about that. I think that's about the time we start our discussion right now, and I welcome any